China confronts Israel, demands immediate withdrawal. Roll dramatic shots of Unsecurity Council. Chinese and Israeli flags map highlights of Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon. In a bold and public move, China has issued a direct call for Israel to withdraw from occupied territory, sparking global headlines and intensifying debates at the United Nations. Roll footage of Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong speaking at UN, scenes from Gaza and Syria. China's ambassador to the UN, Fu Kong, urged Israel to immediately halt military operations in Gaza and withdraw from Syrian and Lebanese territory. He condemned the continued violence, calling it a violation of international law and a threat to regional stability. Pro-humanitarian crisis visuals, Gaza blockade, protests. Beijing also slammed the ongoing blockade of Gaza, demanding full humanitarian access. According to China, using aid as leverage in warfare is unacceptable and deepens the suffering of innocent civilians. Aerials of West Bank settlements. Historical footage from 1967 borders. China reiterated its long-standing support for a two-state solution with East Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital and borders based on the 1967 lines. Officials warned that without meaningful progress, the region risks further escalation. Roland Chambers, Chinese diplomats in discussion, regional maps. With tensions rising, China is stepping into a more vocal diplomatic role, positioning itself as a counterweight to Western influence in Middle East peace efforts. Roll fade into China and Israel flags side by side with global news headlines. Will China's pressure change the course of this decades-old conflict? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates on global affairs. Let me know if you want a version in a specific language or voiceover style, for example, dramatic, neutral, calm.
China has recently intensified its calls for Israel to withdraw from occupied territories and cease military operations, particularly in Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon. Chinese officials have condemned Israel's actions, citing violations of international law and emphasizing the urgent need for a permanent ceasefire. China's position on Israel's military actions. During a United Nations Security Council meeting, Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong urged Israel to immediately halt its military operations in Gaza. He criticized the prolonged conflict, which has resulted in significant civilian casualties and a worsening humanitarian crisis. Ambassador Fu emphasized that military means will not resolve the issue and called for the implementation of a two-state solution as the only viable path forward. China has also condemned Israel's attacks on Lebanon and Syria, labeling them as violations of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Chinese envoy highlighted that such actions exacerbate regional instability and undermine efforts toward peace. Calls for withdrawal from occupied territories. China has explicitly called on Israel to withdraw its forces from Syria and Lebanon. Ambassador Fu Kong stated that the political transition in Syria is at a critical stage and that Israel's military presence hinders progress. He urged Israel to respect the sovereignty of neighboring countries and to cease actions that could escalate tensions. Advocacy for humanitarian access and ceasefire. In addition to military concerns, China has criticized the blockade of Gaza, which has led to severe shortages of essential supplies. Chinese officials have called for the immediate lifting of the blockade to allow humanitarian aid to reach civilians in need. They argue that the use of humanitarian assistance as a bargaining chip violates international humanitarian law. China continues to advocate for a permanent ceasefire and the resumption of peace talks, emphasizing the importance of international cooperation to achieve a lasting resolution to the conflict. China has recently intensified its diplomatic efforts to address the escalating conflicts in the Middle East, particularly focusing on Israel's military actions in Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon. Chinese officials have called for immediate cessation of hostilities, withdrawal from occupied territories, and adherence to international law. China's calls for Israeli withdrawal and ceasefire. At a United Nations Security Council meeting, Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong urged Israel to withdraw its forces from Syria and Lebanon without delay, emphasizing that the political transition in Syria is at a critical stage. He also highlighted that Israeli forces have occupied 5 locations in southern Lebanon, violating Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. China condemned Israel's repeated attacks on Lebanon and Syria, labeling them as violations of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ambassador Fu stressed that such actions exacerbate regional instability and undermine efforts toward peace. Advocacy for humanitarian access into state solution. China has criticized the blockade of Gaza, which has led to severe shortages of essential supplies. Chinese officials have called for the immediate lifting of the blockade to allow humanitarian aid to reach civilians in need, arguing that the use of humanitarian assistance as a bargaining chip violates international humanitarian law.